a.m., we had only managed to go about maybe 20 miles outside of Houston, and we were stuck on the freeway. And a hurricane was getting closer, and people were starting to panic. And people were starting to behave really badly, and the car engines had overheated, and tempers had also overheated. People had gotten out of their cars, they're getting into arguments, and just behaving out of fear and panic, turning on each other because that's all there was to do. And I was just watching all this, and then I noticed that, however, some people, it was like the situation had brought out the best in them. And they were going around trying to calm people down, and if there were older people in the car, they'd offer water. People with children, they were trying to help them. And so the writer part of me started thinking, what is it that in a catastrophe makes some people behave so badly and some people behave so much better? What is it that brings out the worst in some people and the best in some people? And is there some way in which we can learn to deal with catastrophe so that we can behave in that more graceful, positive manner? And out of that thinking, one amazing thing came several years later. And because I'm a fiction writer, there is a catastrophe in that story, but it's not a hurricane, and I'm going to read to you that part, so I won't tell you what it is. But this novel is about a group of strangers who go to an Indian visa office in the United States. And while they're waiting there, this catastrophe occurs. And they can't get out, the situation is very dangerous, and they have to figure out how to deal with it. And how, out of that group of strangers, people of different races and ages and socioeconomic backgrounds, people who, if you saw them on the street, you wouldn't even talk to, ever. Sometimes you'd cross over to the other side of the pavement because we don't, generally when we have the choice, often we don't want to associate with people who are different from us, even though we're living in a more increasingly multicultural and global community. So one amazing thing poses that question, how can a group of strangers be turned into a community? Is it possible? And I'll read you a little bit from the beginning of the book. With each book, I try to set myself a new challenge. As a writer, that's important for me. So before this, all of my books had one hero, or maybe in a novel like Sister of My Heart, two narrators, two people are telling the story, and they have alternate chapters. But since this was a novel about building community, I really didn't want a single hero or heroine in it. So this book has 9 characters, and each of them, in turn, become the narrators of the story. And so that was something different for me. And that was quite challenging, because not all those characters are Indian. Not all of those characters are from a background that I would know just by living my life. So I had to do a lot of research. But I'm going to read to you a part which is in the consciousness of Uma, who is a graduate student. And she lives in California, but she's gone to the visa office to get a visa to come and visit India because her parents, who used to live in the US, have moved back. Now they've resettled back in India. And as you know, that is a phenomenon that is often happening nowadays. And she has decided, she has a boyfriend, his name is Ramon. And she hasn't told her boyfriend that she's coming to the visa office for reasons that will become clearer later on. But now she's been waiting all day in the visa office, and she says, well, maybe I should call Ramon. But she can't get a signal, a mobile signal, so she's walking around trying to get that. Phone to her ear, Uma took a few steps forward. It felt good to stretch her legs. The phone gave a small burp against her ear, but before she could check if it was working, a rumble rose through the floor. It was as though a giant had placed his mouth against the building's foundation and roared. The floor buckled, throwing Uma to the ground. The giant took the building in both his hands and shook it. A chair flew across the room toward Uma. She raised her left arm to shield herself. The chair crashed into her wrist, and a pain worse than anything she had known surged through her arm. People were screaming. Feet ran by her, then ran back again. She tried to wedge herself beneath one of the chairs, as she had been taught long ago in grade school, but only her head and shoulders would fit. The cell phone was still in her other hand, pressed against her ear. Was that Ramon's voice asking her to leave a message? Or was it just her need to hear him? Above her, the ceiling collapsed in an explosion of plaster. Beams broke apart with the sound of gigantic bones snapping. A light fixture shattered. For a moment before the electricity failed, she saw the glowing filaments of the naked bulb. Rubble fell through the blackness, burying her legs. Her arm was on fire. She cradled it against her chest. A useless gesture, and she would probably die in the next minutes. Was that the sound of running water? Was the basement they were in flooding? She thought she heard a beep, the machine ready to record her voice. "Ramon," she cried, her mouth full of dust. She thought of his long, meticulous fingers, how they could fix anything she broke. She thought of the small red moles on his chest. She wanted to say something important and consoling, something for him to remember her by. But she could think of nothing, and then her phone went dead. And so, as you figured out, a major earthquake has hit, and it is really a severe catastrophe. They're completely cut off from the world. No electricity, no telephones, and she is right, a pipe has broken somewhere, the water is rising, things will get worse, and people start panicking. And just as that night when we were trying to escape from Hurricane Rita, in their fear, people begin to turn on each other. And things are really like disintegrating fast. And then finally, Uma says to them, we're just destroying each other. We can't get out, we figured that much out, so we've got to occupy ourselves with something positive. So why don't we each tell each other a story out of our lives, something we've never told anyone. And that way we'll pass the time and we'll get to know a little bit about each other. And everybody thinks this is a terrible idea, because they're like, we're dying and you want us to tell a story? Besides, we don't have any stories to tell. And then Uma says, no, that part I don't believe, because everyone has at least one story. In each life there is at least one amazing thing that becomes the title. And so slowly they begin telling these stories. And as they begin telling these stories and really sharing with people in that room something they've never told anyone, and now they're totally honest, right? Because they think that maybe they only have a few hours left, maybe these are the only people they're ever going to see before they die. So they really start telling some intense stories. And as they do that, just the sharing of the story becomes something that draws them close. So that in the beginning of the book, they are, just like we were as we were trying to get out of Houston, we were like, we want to survive, we don't care what happens to you. That's how they were in the beginning. But by the end, they begin caring about each other. So they don't want to survive at the cost of the other person. They want to survive all together. And that's kind of the framework of one amazing thing. And as I was telling you, the challenge there was to write some different characters, because I really wanted to push things to the limit. I wanted to bring in people of different races and backgrounds. So one of them is African American. He's an older guy, he was in the army. One of them is a young Muslim man. There's a white couple. There's a Chinese grandmother with her granddaughter. And there are some other people, the visa office workers. So the stories they choose to tell and what happens to them, that's one amazing thing. All right, I think you want to do some questions. So I finished my talk, and now it's your turn to talk to me. Okay, let me just say something. I want some easy questions to which I'll be able to provide brilliant answers. Okay, I saw a hand over there.
Ma'am, you have written many books. So
Do we have another mic here?
okay, I can.
Or I'll pass on. Okay, you take the mic, I can...
Yes. Name and then.
My name is Manish Kumar. I'm just PhD student here. Ma'am, you have written many books. So during that journey, can you share that moment when you said, okay, I did it. Now I can write. I can really become writer, and I can change the different genre. I can write in this mode. It's that moment I achieved.
Okay, that's a very good question. Thank you. Thank you. So, yes, you know, in the beginning, for a long time, I was writing, as I told you, I was just writing for myself. I didn't have much confidence. Even when I started publishing in magazines, I would feel, oh, okay, you know, maybe I'm not that good. They published it, but maybe, you know, they weren't really looking carefully, otherwise they wouldn't have published my story. So, but I think after my first collection, Arranged Marriage, came out, and it received a big award, the American Book Award, I think that gave me a lot of confidence. And I began to feel that, yes, these stories, you know, there's something to them that speaks to other people. Because although they were stories very much about the Indian community in the United States, you know, it is my belief that there's something universal and human about literature. That's why we connect to stories from many different countries and of many different times. And I think that was the moment when I said, I think I can be a writer. Yes, this is what I want to do. I really want to do this for the rest of my life. And I still feel that way. You know, being a writer is very exciting. The challenges are always different. There's always a level of surprise. When I sit down to write a story, I know a little bit of what I'm going to write about, but I don't know the whole story. I don't know how things are going to end, but I trust that my imagination will uncover it at the right time. And so I sit down and I write the next part of the story, and then the next, and then the next. And it's like, one writer said it very nicely, it's like driving through the fog at night with your headlights on. You see a little bit, you don't see the whole way, but you see enough to keep going. Another question?
I'm very happy to be. I just drifted in the audience. I came to meet the director, but I was invited to this. So I'm very happy.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
But I have two questions. One is that the art of reading or the art of writing, is it not decaying in the years to come? The visual experience is gaining much more ground. What you experience, if it is presented in a visual experience, it's much more effective, much more powerful. That is one. Second is, it just flashed to me, you said that the people came out of the best and the worst in those circumstances, which you talked about in Houston. Isn't it that the politicians world over are understanding those human outputs as an experimentalist, as scientists do? That given a circumstance, the output would be, the human would react to a situation, like say 9/11. The world has unified against a particular force. Or any situation which happens in the world, any situation which we occur day to day, the politicians are the best psychologists. They understand this is a situation that people will react.